back to GrokTALK. My name's Steve McDonald. I am here with Skip Murphy and Mike Rogers, who's just stepped out for a minute to fetch our guest, Dan Itza, who has been in the state legislature in New Hampshire since, I believe, 2000 or something like that. And he is basically our constitutional expert, the New Hampshire State Constitution in relation to the federal Constitution. And he's written a book called States Have Powers.
Right.
And he's going to be talking to us about that as soon as he gets here.
I thought it was states have rights.
I thought you told me it was states have powers.
I didn't say anything. It was Mike.
Oh.
See, I can blame him.
Okay.
Pass the buck.
Dan Itz is going to be here to talk about his book, States Have Rights. Is it States Have Rights?
States have powers.
States have powers. States have powers.
I was wrong.
He was wrong. I had it right, and he corrected me. So hop on a headset. Dan is here, having hoofed through the freezing cold.
People have rights. People have rights, states have powers, and Dan's here to talk about it. People actually have rights, and I know.
We're having a conversation off mic.
Yeah.
Pretty soon we'll be having a conversation on mic, though, as soon as he puts it on his head. There we go. Hi, Dan. How you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you.
We've been trying to get you in here forever.
Well, I know it's hard, but
it is.
You know, with the electronics, we can also have you in or on by phone too.
True.
But it's always nicer in studio.
It's always nice to see whom you're talking to.
Yes, makes it much easier. So welcome. Hold up the book.
Right. So for the camera over there, states have powers.
Yes.
Use them or lose them.
And we'll have to
and the author.
and the author. Yes.
States have powers. The powers of the people.
Yes.
By the consent of the people. By the consent of the governed.
Article 8. All power originates in the people.
Somehow, some of us aren't too consenting anymore.
Well, why are you not consenting?
Because the government is acting contrary to my rights.
And using powers not delegated to it.
Exactly. At both levels.
Yes.
At the state level to some extent, and at the federal level to a very large extent.
Well, and one of the powers we're not using at the state level is the power to stop the federal government from exercising the powers not delegated to it.
And is this the inspiration for the book? I mean, I can probably just assume it. So tell us, give us a little background about the book before we get into the details, which we're already into the weeds. So.
Well, that's because we know you. We've known you for years. We've had these conversations before. You are the recognized authority here in New Hampshire from our standpoint.
And he's a supplier of wisdom to the 10th Amendment Center, I should add, one of our other favorite organizations.
Thank you. The reason I wrote the book is if you ask most Americans who's in charge of the government, they'll say, well, the people. And you say, how do you know that? And they kind of look at you, they cock their head, and they say, well, the Constitution. What do you mean? Well, anybody can quote typically is the preamble to the Constitution for the United States, we the people. But that's really like an instatement of a whole body of governmental theory of government proceeded. And so the book is really an expository on my sovereignty resolutions that pulls back to the fundamental documents, the political writings of the period, and the constitutions of the states that really justify why the people are in charge of the government and why the states are in charge of the federal government. Even though the Constitution for the United States says that that the laws of the government of the United States are superior to those of the supreme law of the land, but only those pursuant to the Constitution are the part of the supreme law of the land.
Now, one of the things that I've noticed over and over again, and I've written about what you have said for years, we've had lots of videos on, and we get a lot of progressives who will start commenting that you're just nothing but an extremist nitwit for even thinking about this stuff, and who are you? You're just an engineer. And the comeback is, we're all responsible for knowing this stuff, and that just because you may not like the words doesn't mean that they don't have meaning. You know, we've noticed that several of the amendments in the Bill of Rights, which have lain dormant for years and years and years, now all of a sudden are the topic of discussion and have gained great traction, like the 10th Amendment. You know, those powers not officially given reside with the states and the people. And you're bringing it down to the state level. My question is, how do you balance that, the stuff that, where I consider to be the plain language of the constitutions, with the progressive notion that there should be no democracy at all, that there should be this technocratic form of government where these nonpartisan, and you see the big smile on my face,
yes,
nonpartisan experts in various areas should be running government so as to have a more efficient society. How your version, their version, isn't that really the crux of what's the problem today, those two battling themselves out?
It's not just a problem today. I mean, it's been a problem throughout history. The question is, whom do you believe has the legitimate power? Do you believe that where does government get its power? Does it get its power simply because they are the people with the most guns, or do they get that power because it's derived from the rights of the people? You have the inherent right to defend life and liberty, enjoy and defend life and liberty, and acquire, possess, and protect property. That our Constitution of New Hampshire recognizes that right. So the power to stop somebody or apprehend somebody who has stolen your goods or has injured you actually resides with you. You have the right to defend. Now, you've said, gee, if we all gang together, we form a society, we can exercise that power more effectively by creating a justice system, employing people to do the investigation to make sure that we've apprehended the right person, prosecute them. I hire other people to incarcerate them. But that is a collective power. Bastiat in 1850 stated very succinctly that the government has no power that the people don't have themselves. So then, in the reverse, do I have legitimate power to walk up to you, stick a gun in your belly, and demand that you buy my food?
The answer to that is obviously no, it isn't.
Okay,
then
how do you have the right to delegate government to do that on your behalf?
Well, and that is the point that I'm trying to get to, where you've got these two principles now butting heads for real and for big stakes nowadays.
Yes.
There was that professional golfer, Mickelson, I think it was, out in California saying, I'm losing 60% of my income from taxes. And he got in real big trouble for that and backtracked. And I would have said at the same time, this is a problem. I am going to move because this government has become confiscatory. How much of that, I mean, there's lots of stuff that lead into this, Dan.
Right,
We've talked about this before,
yeah.
But how much of this is a function of an illiterate electorate who doesn't understand these things the way that the founders thought that they should, as people using government to say we are going to create a new society through the force of government.
Okay, what is the legitimate role of government? Does society define the government, or does government define society?
Right now, lately, we've been seeing society and progressives redefining the purpose or the proper role of government, where they've adopted FDR's Second Bill of Rights so that we are migrating from a set of negative liberties where the government can't do stuff to you to that of FDR, Wilson, LBJ, and Obama, saying the government must do these things for you. And it's nice to be able to say, well, we'll give you stuff, but at the same time, the dirty little secret is in order to give people stuff, and you've got a price tag.
It's actually a magnification tag.
Where people where they say, we're going to give you stuff, but they won't acknowledge, well, we have to take stuff from other people, or they go and denigrate the 1%, the 2%, the 10%, the 20%, and say, look, they're just being selfish, and they won't give you stuff that they don't deserve.
That's true. And by the way, one of the foremost proponents of the notion that government equals slavery is one of the descendants of slaves. That would be Walter E. Williams, economics professor, who makes the point about sticking the gun in the neighbor's belly very eloquently and even more forcefully than Dan does. He is absolutely a proponent of individual sovereignty and state sovereignty.
Well, the interesting thing is our founders in the Constitution for New Hampshire, what was the capstone, the last article in our Bill of Rights, recur means to read, study, and discuss. So they said a frequent recurrence to the fundamental principles of the Constitution and a constant adherence to justice, moderation, temperance, industry, and frugality, and all the social virtues are indispensably necessary to the preservation of liberty and good government. The blessings of liberty and good government. Now, I want you to think about it. It's not a good idea. It's not, we suggest. It's indispensably necessary. So the first duty we as citizens have is to be discussing what our constitutions mean to us. All the time. The people, and this is the vote, what I call the voter's guide, the people ought, and ought is the moral imperative, is higher than shall or should or must. The people ought, therefore, to have a particular regard to those principles in the choice of their officers and representatives. And they, the people, have the right to require of their lawgivers and magistrates an exact and constant observance of them in the formation and execution of the laws necessary for the good administration of government. Who has the legitimate constitutional power of interpreting the Constitution of New Hampshire? The people at large.
Yeah,
and they have the right to enforce it upon those in government.
And I'm trying to look up, I seem to have become a curator of New Hampshire state representatives on the Democrat side, and sometimes Republicans, of stuff that they say is the proper role of government. And I wanted to, based on what you're reading, and then based on what they're saying, again, it brings up that point, which is working here. Because I understand you're coming at this from a constitutional standpoint, and I'm, once I get to the article, the post that I want, it becomes very clear that they could care less.
Well, and that's the whole point. But the question is, do the people care? The purpose of a constitution is to define the limits of government. One of the things that happened, our founding fathers, they grew up under Great Britain. They trusted Great Britain to defend their liberties, unquestionably. Then suddenly they woke up one morning and found that that government they had trusted to defend their liberty had become dangerous to their liberty. And so they threw off that government. One of the characteristics of the government of Great Britain was that it did not have a written constitution outside of the law. What constitution it did have was actually merely a parliamentary act. The Bill of Rights of 1689 was a parliamentary act. The whole premise of the constitutions after the Declaration of Independence is that they were documents approved by the people, which set the people themselves, which set. And I could reference the document and say, "Hey, you goobers in government, you're exceeding your delegated authority." That's the whole purpose. What you're seeing with the progressives is people reacting to having their wings
Okay.
I'm going to turn my mic back on. We're going to take a quick 60-second break, and then we're going to keep going with Dan Itza.
This is the Coalition of New Hampshire Taxpayers. We're located at 8 North Main in Concord, New Hampshire. This is the repository for all things conservative and municipal. So if you have a problem in your town, your school, your budget committee, the right to know law, and now, at the top of our list is voter fraud. You have a tip for us, some information for us, you want to join or help us out, cnht.org.
Hi, this is Rich Gerard, host of Gerard at Large in the Morning, the Manchester area's only locally owned, locally operated, focused, and interested, riveting radio show, heard live every Monday through Friday from 6 to 9 on 90.7 FM WLMW, New Hampshire Family Radio, and available 24/7 live or archived at GerardAtLarge.com. Be sure to tune in.
GrokTALK.
Okay, we're back. Talking about constitutions. I actually had a Bastiat quote that I was going to read, but it's gone. It's floated away into the universe. So please, back to your point.
The Constitution. My view is that when you elect a politician to serve as a public servant, should be, I am supposed to stay within this constitutional boundary. And what Ian Underwood said so eloquently at his testimony on HB 1589, which we've been seeing also. I've been collecting a whole bunch of quotes from Democrat state reps saying, I want to take your freedoms away. I don't care about liberty. The purpose of government is to regulate behavior. The purpose of government is to legislate behavior. This is not freedom. This is not a public servant. These are governors. These are micro-totalitarians who believe that government has to tell everybody else what to do. And the question is, and I know we're at the state versus the personal level, and I want to get back to your book because otherwise we're going to run out of time. But this is the discussion we always end up in. Other than voting these people out, and you're talking about, well, it's up to the people. Well, if the people don't care.
What was the original purpose of public education in New Hampshire?
Well, I could say several things. So you could say, well, according to John Dewey in that facet, to become useful.
No, go back further.
You're going back. You're going back further. You're going back to Article 6 as originally written. What is the fundamental purpose?
To inoculate the citizens against the devil and all his works, I do believe.
Constitution of New Hampshire, not the Old Deluder Satan Act from when New Hampshire was part of Massachusetts, but New Hampshire is a constitutional entity. Part 1, Article 6, the purpose of public education was to teach people the principles of bottom-up government. Pure and simple, which included the mechanical skills of reading so that you could read the Constitution and the Bible and know when those in government were exceeding their lawful authority. The arithmetic to do the math to know when they were cheating you. But it was first and foremost to educate people so that they would be able to keep those in government under control.
Well, we can see that hasn't been happening for a good
long time because those who sought to expand their power realized they could use public education to deprive the people of the intended education. I look at why I went into government, why I became a representative. We moved up here. We came from Massachusetts, and we knew people who had been aggressed upon by Child Protective Services in Massachusetts. We moved up here, and we found that an awful lot of Massachusetts had leaked up here ahead of us. And I determined to become a plunger to push it back south. And
I like the visualization.
Well,
you're going to send the effluent back where it came.
Exactly. And I got into the legislature to protect people from government. I got on the Children and Family Law Committee because I considered that to be the quintessential liberty committee. Because if you can threaten a person's children, their parentage, then you can manipulate them to do anything you want.
Correct.
So that's why I got there. And my first purpose was, as I learned to understand what was going on, was to restore due process to Child Protective Services, which had been circumvented by making it into a civil procedure rather than a criminal procedure.
We've been talking about some of this stuff for a little bit, and we're almost ignoring your book, which was one of the reasons why you were here. So I'm going to say, okay, even though I started it, I'm going to say, let's stop it. Excuse me. Tell us about your book.
Well, this actually leads into whom you send up to Concord is the most important decision you will ever make, because we have more legitimate power to reach into your private lives, per the Constitution, than the federal government. We are also your only defense against the federal government. So if whom you send to Concord is going to define the limits of your liberty. Our first job corporately as we sit in Concord, I believe, is to lock arms left and right and defend you from encroachments by the federal government. This is what Hamilton said in Federalist Paper 28, is that the legislatures of the states, you didn't have to be afraid of creating this somewhat more powerful general government under the Constitution rather than the Articles of Confederation, because you would have your state legislatures, and these would be people politically aware who would recognize at the first instance when the general government was exceeding its legitimate authority, and they would beat them back. I'm not. This is not some radical. This is Alexander Hamilton, the highest of high Federalists.
Yeah,
the next paragraph. The next paragraph is a battle strategy for the states against the federal government. Not only do you have your state legislatures that are going to protect you, but you have your militias, and with the militias of the states, they'll be able to thwart any actual government tyranny.
And that hasn't worked out so well. But Hamilton was one of the chief proponents of, as he put it, an energetic central government, and yet he saw that the states were your guardians of liberty.
Exactly. I mean,
unfortunately, well, the question comes is, how do we unwind this? Because progressives want, as I've said for years, they want to centralize power as far up the chain as possible and further away from the citizenry as absolutely possible, because here in New Hampshire, I can literally walk down the street and knock on my representative's door and start screaming. When that person's in Concord, I can't do it as easily, and when they're down in D.C., it becomes much harder still. Progressives want that, going back to that technocratic control, central command and control state that they want. How do we fight that here? How do we say, as I asked Bill O'Brien one day, your whole purpose seems to be to devolve power out of Concord and back to the towns and the people, and he said yes. So what do we do? How do we motivate the people who don't care about politics or just vote blindly because they got an R or a P next to their name, for the people D.
P? Yeah,
D,
I said
D.
P. I had my mic off because it's
D.
D.
How do we get them involved, which is always the quintessential question. How do we get them re-involved in the process?
Well, first of all, you have to wake them up. You have to explain to them where their rights are being violated. You have to make it personal. I mean, up close and personal. The best way to get anybody involved in government is to take something from them via government, rather than give things to them, or perceive what they perceive as giving things to them. Remember that government can't give anything to you without first taking it away from you.
But when they're giving it to the majority of the people and taking it from the few people, then what?
Eventually the system must collapse under its own weight. I mean, that's unfortunately, and that's what history tells us. I mean, one of the things that Andrew Tyler, historian, 1775, is kind of interesting to think of, a historian in 1775, but
just because America doesn't have history beyond that.
But one of the things he did was to go back and look at the prior civilizations of the world, and he observed that civilizations always go through a cycle. And I can't quote it perfectly because there's a few in the back end that are a little bit confusing or almost redundant, so they're hard to remember. But you go from tyranny to faith, from faith to liberty, from liberty to abundance, from abundance to apathy, from apathy to dependency, and from dependency back to tyranny. And I think there's one other step in there in the
sounds right to me.
Yeah,
apathy,
close
dependency.
enough.
Yeah, we're somewhere in there, right around the dependency, and damn close to tyranny.
And we are. And the question is, can we, because of our indigenous culture of liberty, and we do have one, not just in New Hampshire but in America, we have a perception of ourselves of having liberty. Can we ricochet off the tyranny without actually entering into it? I don't know. We can certainly try. We must try. The thing that's going to, it's very evident, is the thing that is going to restore liberty is at least the threat of tyranny. When I beginning of last term, so under the Bill O'Brien speakership, I was asked by a representative at the back of Representatives Hall, and he was all morose about the election of Barack Obama and things that were happening. And he says, "What is it going to take to turn all this around?" And I just turned to him and I said, "Tyranny."
Wow. What a way to almost end the program.
He's right. Absolutely. That is exactly what it takes. And like you said, you have to take something away from somebody for them to wake up, unless they walk into your store and take your stuff, or unless they give you a health care plan you don't want, as an example, or force you off one you liked. Until they do something that makes it important enough to you to respond the way people have been brought up in the last couple generations, they're just like, it's no big deal. And then it's almost too late at that point.
Well, and that's always the way it happens, from apathy to dependency.
We're actually going to run out of time, so if you could tell us where to get a hold of you or your book.
Best to get a hold of me, because we're in the midst of publishing right now. So, ITSENH, my last name, New Hampshire, ITSENH at Comcast.net.
And will it be published on Amazon?
It will be on Amazon. It will be in Barnes Noble Web. It'll be on Kindle.
Okay, and you're going to give us a link as soon as we can get one to publish it.
And there is a Facebook page already in place.
All right, thank you very much, Dan. I'm sorry that
States
flew by
Have
way too
It
fast.
did.
The book is States Have Powers. My name is Steve McDonald. We'll be back next week with more guests, more conversation, and more GrokTALK.
Grok TV.